Journalists Roundtable is a half-hour discussion with Pennsylvania journalists about the week's top political news and current events. Journalists Roundtable is a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to Journalists Roundtable. I'm Larry Casper. Our guests are Dennis Owens from ABC 27 in Harrisburg, Charlie Thompson from PennLive, and Stephen Caruso from Spotlight PA. Welcome, everyone. Stephen, we're going to start with you. Pennsylvania had its primary election on Tuesday. How well did the incumbents do?
Well, they did pretty well, and that makes sense because incumbency is a huge advantage. You are a sitting elected lawmaker. Your name is in the press. You get to send out mailers. There's a lot of good things that come with that. So about 21 had challengers who were 21 incumbents had challengers on the ballot. And that alone is an accomplishment because you have to get signatures. You need those signatures to be vetted by lawyers who might be trying to kick you off. And of those 21 who just had challengers on the ballot, only 4 lost. I have a feeling that's probably maybe about average, maybe a little bit higher, but definitely not the most we've seen in a primary season in Pennsylvania. And, even then, 2 of those who lost were barely incumbents. They were folks who were elected in special elections, picked by party insiders, and then put on the ballot. This is their first time they ever faced an electorate, and they didn't pass muster then. So, it's good to be an incumbent. A lot of political scientists will always note that it's easier to raise money, it's easier to, put your name out there, and it's easier to make sure you're on the top of people's minds when they go to cast a ballot on election day.
Stephen, among the congressional races that you covered, which issue got the most attention from the candidates?
Look, the number one issue I think on everyone's mind is that amorphous concept known as affordability. The funny thing is, it basically just means people aren't getting as much bang for their buck as they used to, whether we're talking about energy bills, gas in their car, rent, food, it's everything. And I think, generally what it means is people want to see the government do a little bit more to whether it's, state spending or aggressive action against those who they see as driving that affordability crisis, landlords, utility companies, data centers, see them tackled by an assertive government. I think that's, definitely in the Democratic primaries. I think we're even seeing that in Republican primaries. President Donald Trump has, been cutting deals with utility companies to try and lower rates, maybe driven up by data centers. He's kind of someone who has supported a more aggressive use of government writ large. So, I think every voter is thinking about that. The difference between the parties and among voters is basically just how far should elected officials go to actually tackle this issue, and how far is too far?
Charlie, let's look at Congress in District 10, and that would be Janelle Stelson. She won the Democratic primary over her rival, Justin Douglas. How did she do it?
Well, honestly, I think just to set the stage, Larry, the 10th is the district held by Representative Scott Perry, former chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, and a guy that Democrats across the country really have been pining to take out as they try to recapture the majority in the state house. So Perry has a big bullseye on his back. So that makes, and because the 10th in the current iteration is rather competitive, still Republican leaning, but it's viewed as gettable by the Democrats. And in this primary, they had Janelle Stelson, a longtime television news anchor on the NBC affiliate here in South Central PA, running for the seat. She was the Democratic nominee in 2024, and she kind of ran this campaign as an incumbent against Justin Douglas, who was an upstart Dauphin County commissioner, and Janelle just basically muscled through on what I would say is what we are learning is the power of long-time stability in a media chair, and I think we learned that seriously trumps being a county commissioner in one county, and because Janelle has that name ID established over 3 decades in the business here, and she kind of ran a rope-a-dope campaign, didn't really put herself out there that much, trying to not make mistakes. didn't want to give Justin Douglas a debate stage to elevate his candidacy, and you know, it
Charlie,
worked. It worked fine for her.
She won overwhelmingly.
So, yeah, so she won. She trounced him in the primary, and now this sets up a big rematch, one of the biggest in the state.
I understand you talked to Douglas just this morning.
Yesterday morning.
Yesterday morning, and
a morning after interview.
And what were his reflections on his defeat?
Well, I mean, I think he, you know, Justin Douglas learned that there's a big difference between, you know, he was very celebrated in 2023 because when he won that county commissioner seat, it flipped the majority on the Board of Commissioners in Dauphin County for the first time in over 100 years to the Democratic Party. And he became kind of he kind of had his 15 minutes of fame. In fact, in early 2024, or maybe it was even late 2023, when then President Joe Biden kicked off his, you know, futile reelection effort before everybody wanted to get rid of him.
I remember.
Justin Douglas was the guy that they brought into Valley Forge to introduce President Biden. I mean, he had that much cachet from that upset. And but the thing is, he found the hard way, the difference between, oh, I can, you know, 3 out of 4 win this seat, so I only have to finish 3rd place to win in a county race versus a 3 times as large congressional district where it's survive and advance, and your opponent has about 10 times as much money.
Well, how about you, Dennis?
Well, I was just going to say, Justin Douglas
is within your viewing area, so you were watching that.
Well, yes, Justin Douglas may have a future. I think he's on the progressive side. Janelle Stelson, the longtime TV news anchor, got very close to Scott Perry the last time, and almost from the moment of that loss, some D.C. folks anointed her. The governor endorsed her, and she had $3 million in the bank to Justin Douglas's $10,000. So it was very lopsided
to
from the
Stephen's
get-go.
point, she was kind of running as the incumbent in this race, and she prevailed. And I would also echo, I don't mean to be dismissive of Douglas. If you watch him, I mean, he's very effective. He's very smart, and he definitely has a future when Democrats are looking for a candidate around South Central Pennsylvania again.
Well, you mentioned, too, that it's most watched in the state. This one's watched in the nation. In fact, there are 4 congressional seats in Pennsylvania that are being watched in the nation that Republicans have and Democrats think they can take. And, of course, it's Janelle Stelson. Those matchups are now set, and it's Janelle Stelson in the 10th.
Yeah.
Now let's consider another race, Dennis, that was going on within your viewing area, and that would be PA Senate District 48. That was a race between Chris Gebhardt and Clovis Crane. Now this race had a very strong presence on local TV in South Central Pennsylvania. Why?
Well, the advertisements were on in our newscast, and they would be on 3 times in a newscast, and it's not often that you get an ad in which one person is calling the opponent a drunkard and a deadbeat. But they did that in this one, and it was one of 3. What was basically happening, it was a statewide situation. That happens to be one example of it, because let's face it, the Lebanon Berks Lancaster County Republican primary is normally a sleepy affair that nobody's paying attention to. Chris Gebhardt is the incumbent. There was Lisa Baker also and Camera Bartolotta also that were incumbents in other parts of the state that faced very stiff challenges and some nasty tone campaign ads. And it was a group called Citizens Alliance Pennsylvania. So basically, they're being challenged from the right. One of the big stories from the election night is the incumbents all survived, despite the fact that millions of dollars were spent in those races in a primary against sitting incumbents that their voting records are otherwise conservative. What it was is a proxy fight between these skills games, which are everywhere and currently not taxed and regulated. Currently, we're waiting on the state Supreme Court to rule on whether they're legal or not. Chris Gebhardt in Lebanon County brought the bill that would tax them at 35%. The industry didn't like that. They want it to be lower. And so they put up opponents in 3 of these different places to challenge, basically, I think it's challenging Republican establishment, Senate Republican establishment leadership. And had any of those 3 lost, the winner was going to be a headache for Senate Republican leadership. So Senate Republican leadership was one of the winners on Tuesday night.
Stephen, I know you're tuned into this discussion, and before we talk about any more about District 48, the Senate, can you give us just a quick review on PACs, political action committees? In other words, tell us in brief what they're allowed to do.
Yeah, so there's kind of like, there's a lot of ways to spend on politics, but fundamentally, the two main ways would be, I am a candidate, or I'm someone who's directly cooperating with the candidate. If that's the case, I can take money. I just have to make sure I write down every single person who gave me $1 and, or, $1 million. This is Pennsylvania. We don't put limits on it. And then I spend it as I direct it as the candidate or in cooperation with the candidate. Hey, how are you talking about this issue of data centers? I want to make sure my messaging matches. That's the pretty traditional way to do this. But what we have had since Citizens United, but the roots of this even go back deeper to the 70s, is independent spending, uncoordinated spending. That comes through super PACs. And that, a PAC has to be able to say where their money comes from. A super PAC can get away with not, with taking it from foundations, from LLCs, from places that don't say who is actually paying them money. The super PAC might have a name like Citizens for a Better Tomorrow, and their funding might be a foundation. It's just called the Pennsylvania Foundation. You have no idea who it is. Now the main thing, so this group can get millions and millions and millions of dollars, and then spend it. The main thing is they just can't coordinate. And that sometimes leads to some of the messaging that Dennis was talking about, where you start to hear messages like they're a deadbeat, they're a drunkard, going after people's records in aggressive ways, bringing stuff up that just hasn't really been as vetted by the media or the public writ large, because, people have a ton of money to spend and they have an agenda and an axe to grind, and they're going to do it because, this is the political system we live in.
So tell us more about the gambling interests that made their presence known during this campaign we're talking about in PA Senate number 48.
Yeah, so it is easier to hide money if you're using a super PAC, but you can, if you know the right way to look for campaign finance reforms, you can find it. So what I found from looking through state and federal records is that what we saw is about $9 to $10 million in spending on these legislative races, particularly those 3 Senate races that Dennis noted, featuring the incumbents of Chris Gebhardt, Lisa Baker, and Camera Bartolotta, all of whom are Republican incumbents, all of whom are closely aligned with leadership. Most of that money, though, was actually spent to protect them, to either hold up their record or attack their opponents. It was about $6.6 million, and it came from a group called Win for Pennsylvania, where if you go back a couple notches of where the money came from, it came from sports betting firms. We're talking about Fanatics, DraftKings, FanDuel, those sort of groups, who loaded up a big super PAC and have been spending across the country in states that both have legal sports betting, like Pennsylvania, or in states that don't. I should note that the skill games argument, too, is fundamentally an argument about revenue. Gambling conversations, while tricky, it's easier to slap a tax on something related to gambling than it is to raise everyone's taxes, when they go buy food or when, they go get a service done or whatever on that sales tax or personal income tax. So that's what this is about. This is a conversation about where to get revenue from. And where the sports bettors come in is there were conversations last year during the budget impasse of potentially raising taxes on their product of, sports bets. That ended up dying. And now, soon after that conversation ended, we see sports bettors coming in and spending a ton of money to back up, $6.6 million, majority of the money spent to back up Senate Republicans. The sports betting PAC has not gotten back to me despite repeated attempts asking them to, but I'm very curious to see how that'll play out, now that we have this other big moneyed interest on the table in Pennsylvania, on top of skill games, on top of casinos, on top of the horse racers, on top of every single one who has their, fingers in the pie of betting in Pennsylvania.
Stephen, about 2 minutes ago, you mentioned Senator Camera Bartolotta, and she was quoted in your story, and she says that supporters of skill games are trying to take the PA Senate hostage. What else did she say to support that point?
Well, what her point was is that, these challengers, to go back to what Dennis was saying about skill games, they were almost entirely funded. Citizens Alliance was almost entirely funded this cycle by Pace-O-Matic, the firm that manufactures and makes the technology that runs these machines, whose legality is now before the state Supreme Court, that are all over the state in corner stores and convenience stores and in social clubs. So her point was effectively, my opponent isn't my opponent. My opponent is Citizens Alliance and skill games. And, to Dennis's point as well, this isn't even so much about the particulars of what the exact tax rate is, I think. Talking to the Capitol lobbyists who know this game well, their point was it's about the policy, sure. That's sort of the starting point, but this is also about leadership. This is about, if you put enough people in who are allied with your group, they might be willing to change leadership, find a different team that's more aligned with you, more conservative on some issues, potentially, or, and willing to maybe pass a bill you like better. So, what the senator's point, Senator Bartolotto's point is that, all of this spending is an attempt to change the makeup of Senate Republicans to try and get a better outcome. And, that's our political system in an age when you can spend as much money as you want.
Charlie, did you find anything surprising about Tuesday's primary?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that I did. I think we're always looking for surprises, but I mean, most of the candidates that the parties seem to prefer won. I mean, with the possible exception
upsets, in other words?
Well, with the possible, I mean, even in the 3rd district in Pennsylvania, that's not really a competitive seat in the general election, but the race to succeed Dwight Evans, right? I mean, Representative Chris Robb won that primary, but maybe people, I don't know. I didn't look at that one really closely because we're more focused on the big general election races, but. Maybe because of the split between the other candidates, he won pretty easily. But that was a progressive that not everybody in the party wanted, and so that was kind of interesting. But I think it's like going to the general, and we'll see where the chips fall there, because there's a lot of shifting cross currents that could define yet how this election year turns out.
Dennis, how about you? Anything
Governor
interesting
Shapiro,
on Tuesday?
By my count, Governor Shapiro, first of all, the top of the ticket in November, both of them ran unopposed. It's Josh Shapiro and Stacey Garrity. Josh Shapiro got over 1 million votes. Stacey Garrity got 600-some thousand. Democrats are saying there's an enthusiasm gap. I'm not sure you can make that inference in a primary election, and there's nobody really on the top of the ticket there. Jason Ritchie will be her running mate. Stacey Garrity, that is, on the Republican side. That's who she endorsed. So that has set up. But Governor Shapiro also endorsed a couple, including Janelle Stelson, who we've already talked about in the 10th. Governor Shapiro endorsed 3 people in congressional races, and they all were victorious on election night. However, he didn't publicly endorse, so it was Sharif Street, and it was Chris Robb, and it was Dr. Alice Stanford, an outsider who was coming in, woman. He didn't endorse in that, but the fact is a lot of people said Robb was not his choice, and that for Josh Shapiro, who may have, is this the first time this is going to be said here? He may have national thoughts.
I lost count a while ago, Dennis.
Yeah, okay. So if he's got presidential ambitions, that the one area he doesn't want to have to defend is too far left, and Chris Robb could drag things further left than he likes, and those two have actually sparred a little bit in the past. So Robb was not his favored choice, is the conventional wisdom, though Shapiro has certainly not said anything like that.
And at the end of the day, though, I mean, he's very, very likely to win that general election. And at the end of the day, if that helps, I mean, if the Democrats, what Shapiro wants more than anything as a good Democrat would be, I would think, the Democrats to have majority control of the U.S. House.
Well, but that seat is the most Democratic seat in America, from what I've heard. I've heard that said, if it's not one or it's two. So it's going, that's a safe Democratic seat. The election was Tuesday night, and it's Chris Rapp.
Right.
Dennis, let's go back to a remark you made a minute ago about the votes for Shapiro and Garrity. You said Shapiro got about 1 million votes. You said Garrity got 600,000. Is that right?
Roughly.
So what does that say? I mean, both technically were winners, of course, that night. But what does that performance for Garrity say? How potent will she be in November?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Democrats are trumpeting it and saying, oh, enthusiasm gap. All I'm saying is I'm not so sure you can draw that inference necessarily from a primary election on Tuesday. But clearly more people voted for the governor. He is popular. He is well funded. She has, I don't think it's stepping out of line to say, she has an uphill fight.
Yeah.
Stephen, let's go back to you. Let's turn away from the election, at least for a few minutes here, and consider some of the other stories you've been working on. And you were working on one about electricity affordability and high energy prices. We all know about that. And the governor wrote a letter to the utilities, and he's trying to have a hand in what happens in the future. Tell us briefly what that's about.
Yeah, so the governor put a letter out to, going back to this idea of affordability, he's done a letter to the utilities. So these are not folks who generate electricity. They're the folks who get the electricity from a power station to our sockets. And he wrote a letter to them saying, I want you to do these things before you come to the PUC, which is the state agency overseeing them, asking for more money, asking for a rate increase, asking for consumers to pay more of their dollars to get the juice they are used to getting. You know, the things he asked for were, you know, trying to reduce the amount of profit that's baked into their based on their equations and what they asked for. He asked them for also to use some government financing through the U.S. Treasury to fund some of their projects, so we reduce the cost of lending. He thought all of this combined could lead to more affordable prices. Now, he doesn't have a lot of power on this directly. He has a big bully pulpit, though. For instance, you know, the CEO of PECO resigned a few days after basically the governor made a big fight over a PECO rate increase that, you know, they went to the PUC, they revealed, and, you know, Shapiro led the charge to say, like, this is too much money. This is sheer greed, I think is the word he used. And PECO's CEO stepped down. They withdrew the case. They were clearly chastened. So, you know, that bully pulpit that the governor has, and I think it is particular to Josh Shapiro because, you know, he's a very strong communicator, is clearly powerful. The issue is more of, though, how do you put this stuff in the law and how do you make sure it's followed outside of just, you know, when there is attention on it from the governor? Because, you know, the governor is a person who has a lot of obligations. You know, how many reporters are there going to the PUC to cover these cases? How many lawmakers are paying attention? What are the PUC commissioners doing? You know, that's a board that I don't think a lot of people really know about, particularly in this day and age. So, you know, they're powerful suggestions when I talk to folks in the energy space that they liked a lot. The big thing is, how do you follow through on them? He does have a new staffer in his office who's going to take the lead on enforcement. But again, you know, I think the question is always like, you know, it's one thing to say something, it's a whole other thing to do something.
Stephen, you did mention the Public Utility Commission, and you also said that the governor's authority in situations like this, trying to set energy rates, is certainly limited. How much cooperation does he need from the Public Utility Commission? And as you said, some of our viewers really don't know anything about it, so take a minute to explain their significance to this.
Yeah, so the PUC is a, you know, it's been around for probably over 100 years at this point, but it's a public board made up of gubernatorial appointees who are then confirmed by the Senate, whose job is to take a final vote on any sort of increases by utilities. So we're talking electric, we're talking gas, we're talking, you know, even like transportation providers, railroads, taxi companies, a whole swath of things that have been defined under state law as public utilities. Are they must go before this board. There's a private, or not a legalistic process by which they, other advocacy groups, haggle over how much is going to be paid out by different groups, by consumers, residential consumers, by industrial consumers, by commercial consumers, and then the PUC votes to approve it, saying, yes, this passes the public interest. It's a very wonky process. There are people who spend decades just studying it, and even the people who are experts will, you know, I try to be someone who has to understand a lot of stuff, and my eyes kind of glaze over, because I'm like, damn, this is a lot. With that said, you know, the PUC, it's very powerful. It has so much power. And, you know, I think there's going to need to be cooperation between that board, that commission, and the governor's office if they want to get any of what the governor said. They have moved. Oh, go ahead.
Stephen, pardon me, our time is limited. Last question on this subject. When the utilities got the governor's letter that contained these demands, briefly, what was their reaction?
Pretty much, thank you for your commentary. We will take it under advisement.
All right, let's move over to Charlie. You wrote about something interesting. This has to do with unlicensed artificial intelligence doctors. The governor is going to court to stop a chatbot from practicing medicine. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, well, it was something that Shapiro teased a while ago, and I think you had the video of it, Dennis. But yeah, they went to court because there's a company called Character AI that, and I'm in over my depth talking too much about artificial intelligence.
Well, an investigator tried to engage with a chatbot there.
They're apparently companions. They're
right,
artificial companions.
as I understand it, you can create. People can create characters on Character AI, and among other things. But
by the way, the two old guys here. This is
I
not
know.
exactly our thing.
Stephen may know more, but the thing is, yes, one of the investigators in the Shapiro administration. I can't even remember which agency it was.
Well, he engaged
the
with
Bureau
a
of
chatbot
Occupational
named
Affairs.
Emily,
it
and
was,
they had a conversation, and Emily made certain claims that were found to be dubious.
Right. Ultimately, the AI character described herself as having a license in Pennsylvania to
be a
practice.
therapist,
and you know,
So someone checked on that right
this
away.
caught the attention of the Department of State, and the license that they provided was fictitious. It didn't exist, and you know, so I mean, they did their homework and obviously could prove that there's the AI character doesn't have a license, and the governor is you know, going to court to try to get this company to cease and desist this kind of thing. And
I wonder
for
if this particular company made any attempt to disclose that the bot wasn't
They
human.
say they do. Actually, they do. They say, hey, we're fictitious. Do not listen to any advice. These are fictitious characters.
So that's on the page. That's
their argument
that's the page
back.
you land on
Yes.
when you go there.
Yes, but that's not helping when we're in a world of AI and companions and people get in deep to it. And this is just one specific example of a broader bipartisan effort. Attorney General Dave Sunday is Republican, Governor Josh Shapiro, Democrat, to really rein in some of the things going on with AI. In fact, Dave Sunday just yesterday, as we taped this, it was yesterday, laid out, he went around the state talking to teenagers about their use of social media and how it's impacting their mental health. And he's got a whole series of recommendations to both the teens, to parents, to schools, to the companies themselves. They want make sure you're age restricting, age verification, some of that stuff. But this is a big, big topic. And it's not going away anytime soon, and a lot of elected officials are on it and working to rein some of it in.
And I imagine this company character AI, they've said something in their defense. Charlie, do you know?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it goes back to Dennis's point that they say that they make clear on their site that these are not real people.
And so that's the extent of their defense at this point.
And nobody should be going to one of their characters for professional medical advice or anything like that.
Except, is it really clear if it's a 13, 14, or 15-year-old that they're not catching that clear?
And if the character is just railroading past that and saying, I'm a licensed psychiatrist or psychologist, and, you know.
Gentlemen, we only have about 2 minutes left in this show. And Dennis, I want you to talk about this story about billboards that popped up in Lancaster County that promote a website called leavingmaga.org. Tell us briefly who's behind
Basically,
this
it's a fellow
and
in
why are they
Florida
doing
who
it?
says he was the biggest Trumper ever, had all kinds of problems with family and friends, and then just started to be disillusioned by Donald Trump and started this. It's really a group therapy session website for people who love Donald Trump, now not so sure, and they put billboards around the country, about 4 or 5 of them, I think.
And this guy even campaigned for Trump.
He campaigned for Trump.
Now he regrets it.
Well, he's just regretting where MAGA has gone and wants people to get on the website and let's commiserate and see exactly how many of us there are, is his thought. But interesting to me was that they put it in Ruby Red, Lancaster County. And he said we did that by design because we want to go where potentially a lot of the Trump supporters are and see if they're feeling the same thing we're feeling.
Okay, last question for this show. Charlie, can you tell me in about 30 seconds, what are you looking forward to in the November election that'll be especially interesting?
Wow, just how's it going to play out? I mean, I'm dying to know how it turns out. But I mean, I think there's a lot of headwinds against the Republican Party, but I also am very much a believer in the fact that this is May, and that's a couple political generations away is the general election voting.
Things can happen in 5 months' time.
A lot can change. And what about wild card issues like local data center issues that might pop up and force people to take positions that could play a decisive role in some local races that might change things? I mean, there's a lot to watch.
All right, our guests have been Dennis Owens from ABC 27 in Harrisburg, Charles Thompson from PennLive, and Stephen Caruso from Spotlight PA. Thanks, everyone. That is it for Journalist Roundtable. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.
Full episodes of politics and policy content like the program you just listened to are available to stream with the PCN Select app. Discover other shows like The Capitol Preview, On the Issues, candidate interviews, and more. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.